it's not actually correlating with any of their values at all. It's because he's a populist leader and he owns the left, right? I bet there's a more sophisticated argument I could put together here, but I would have to, I wouldn't do this live in a conversation. I would have to have rehearsed and debated these talking points to get there, but.
And it hasn't been done, so it's a matter of opinion.
Like that, because I can't tell, are you genuinely suggesting that Hitler's rise to power and his maintaining power in Nazi Germany was done on the backs of appealing to left-wing voters? That's the implication of what he's saying. Do we really think that's the case? It's obviously not the case. And when you think about like his rise to power, if I were to start listing positions, right, intense xenophobia, blaming everything on a mysterious group of people in power that seem to control all of society, who also have a big interest in credit scores and interest rates, racial superiority, obsession with dominance hierarchies.
That's all technically possible.
Like these typically don't sound like left-wing beliefs. Not to say that the far left people were better, but I think there was a different way that left-wing people maintained their authoritarian regimes. It's just a different path.
So, and it hasn't been done, so it's a matter of opinion.
Sure.
So,
I don't necessarily disagree. That's something you could do.
Okay, I was going to tell you this story. Okay, well, this has...
The KPD literally worked for the NSDAP interests. I mean, like, kind of. People say... So leftists will lie and say that the Nazis never worked with the communists early on in Nazi Germany or worked together, which is a lie. But then other people will say, oh, well, they worked together, which is kind of a lie. The reality is that, now conjecture, boom, okay, conjecture time. I think the reality is that when the administration is failing for whatever reason, a certain people, which I think were the Social Democrat Party at the time, when it feels like they're failing, it gives it an opportunity for extremist parties to come up and say they can do a better job. And the KPD and the Nazi people were those people that said that we can do better. At times, they both wanted to work together over the people in power, the SOCDEMs, because they thought they could do a better job. So they, would vote for each other or run or do attacks in the streets, other dumb shit, in the lead up to Hitler and the takeover power and everything. So I don't think you could say that like, oh, they never worked with each other, they never liked each other, but it's also not really fair to say they worked together like they were on the same team. I don't think they were on the same team. They just were all, they were anti-liberal. They didn't like the SOCDEMs at the time, so they were willing to watch the system fall. The same way that like Bernie bros and Trumples might have been both against the establishment, but I don't know if they were truly on the same team, if that makes sense.
Has to do with the use of power. So I spent a time with a group of scholars putting and analyzing the Exodus story in Exodus 7.
I noticed on your podcast you seemed a bit uneasy. Is being a podcast host a lot different than being a guest? It's a bit different, but mainly I was just like checking production and getting audio. There's a ton of like show feedback that I was doing while we were doing it. I probably could have waited until after the show and just reviewed, but I wanted to adjust it on the fly so that there'd be if there was one big problem at the beginning of the show that fucked the whole thing up, then I couldn't get much good feedback afterwards in rewatching things. And
seminar recently, and so the Exodus story is a very interesting story because it's what would you say? It's an analysis of the central tendency of movement away from tyranny and slavery. That's a good way of thinking about it. So the possibility of tyranny and the possibility of slavery are possibilities that present themselves to everyone within the confines of their life, psychologically and socially. You can be your own.
Wasn't there an actual right-wing party in Germany at the time? I imagine the Nazi Party was the de facto left-wing party. What? I don't think they were ever considered a left-wing party. That's not my understanding. I've never read that or seen that. But also, I haven't studied pre-World War II Germany or the Weimar Republic or something. I haven't studied it. It's a great deal, but I've never heard of the initial Nazi Party ever being viewed as a left-wing party.
Own tyrant with regards to the imposition of a set of radical doctrines that you have to abide by and punish yourself brutally whenever you deviate from them. And we all contend with the issue of tyranny and slavery. And there's an alternative path, and that's what the Exodus story lays out. And Moses is the exemplar of that alternative path, although he has his flaws. And one of his flaws is that he turns too often to the use of force. So he kills an Egyptian, for example, an Egyptian noble who has slayed a Hebrew, one of Moses' Hebrew slave brothers, and he has to leave. There's a variety of indications in the text that he uses his staff, he uses his rod, and he uses power when he's supposed to use persuasion and legal or verbal invitation and argumentation. And this happens most spectacularly right at the end of the sojourn. So Moses has spent 40 years leading the Israelites through the desert. And he's right on the border of the promised land. And really what that means at a more fundamental basis is that he's at the threshold of attaining what he's been aiming at, what he's devoted his whole life to. And he's been a servant of that purpose in the highest order. And the Israelites are still in the desert, which means they're lost and confused. They don't know which way is up. They're still slaves. And now they're dying of thirst, which is what you die of, spiritual thirst, if you're sufficiently lost. And they go to Moses and ask him to intercede with God. And God tells Moses to speak to the rocks so that they'll reveal the water within. And Moses strikes the rocks with his rod twice instead, right? He uses force. And so God says to him, you'll now die before you enter the promised land.
How much of the Bible do you actually remember? Did your school have something similar to Bible study? I mean, each year in school, because I went to a private high school, we had to take a religious class. Each semester we had to take a religious course. So we did like a Bible history for 1 year with Father Cinnarude, baby, who apparently got fired for touching somebody or accused of. I don't know what happened to that. I don't remember. I mean, I probably know more than the average Christian, but I wouldn't say like my biblical scholarship is very high or anything.
It's Joshua who enters and not Moses. Okay, and you might wonder why I'm telling you that story. I'm telling you that story
I
because
think there's any value in the Bible? Not much, but I don't know. If you're very lost and want something to read, I don't know, maybe.
those concepts at the
I mean, if you're totally spiritually lost or destitute, maybe having a religion can give you like a framework to live your life by. I think it just depends. That's a complicated question.
It's Joshua who enters and not Moses. Okay, and you might wonder why I'm telling you that story. I'm telling you that story because those concepts at the center of that cloud of concepts that you described are stories, right? They're stories. And if they're well formulated, they're archetypal stories. And this is an archetypal story that's illustrating the danger of the use of compulsion and force. You know, and so one of the problems you're obviously obsessed by and that I'm trying to solve is what do we do as an alternative to tyranny, whether it's for a utopian purpose in the future or maybe for the purpose of like conservatives censoring music lyrics they don't approve of. And one answer is we don't use force. We do the sort of thing that you and I are trying to do right now, which is to have a conversation that's aimed at clarifying things. And so that's a principle that's something like the consent of the governed, right? It's something like, but it's also something like you have the right to go to hell in a handbasket if that's what you choose. And I'm, as long as you don't, you know, in doing so, you're not in everyone's way too much. You have the right to your own destiny, right? And so, and you don't get to use power to impose that. That's the other thing that worries me about what's going on the utopian front, because the problem is, you know, once you conjure up a climate apocalypse and you make the case that there's an impending disaster that's delayed, and you might say, well, delayed how long? And the response would be, well, we're not sure, but it's likely to occur in the next 100 or so years, which is pretty inaccurate. You now have a universal get out of jail card that can be utilized extremely well by power-mad psychopaths. And they will absolutely do that because power-mad psychopaths use whatever they can to further their cause.
So this is my issue, I think. This is my issue with a lot of people when it comes to political conversations. I think that everything you've said is true. And I think that all of it is, it's good analysis, but I feel like it just gets wielded sometimes in one direction, and then people kind of miss that it completely and fully describes their entire side as well. And the thing that I feel like the only solution to this is you hinted at it. It's more than just conversation, although that's a good start. We have to go back to inhabiting similar areas. We have to go back to inhabiting similar like media landscapes. I think that the issue that we're running into right now more than anything else is people live in completely separate realities at the moment, such that if we were even to describe basic reality, how many illegal immigrants came into the United States last year? That should be a factual number that we can know.
How many do you think?
Somebody, the actual number, probably in the hundreds of thousands. I think some conservatives think it's 3 million per year over the past 3 years because they look at like border contacts or they look at asylum seekers and they're not looking
Yeah,
at
I
like
think it's
processing laws.
3.6 million.
Came into the U.S. and stayed.
Yes, through the southern border.
Okay. So
You know the historical. You know the
wait.
Oh god. I'm so triggered. Like, are you about to jump into a hole? No, hold on. Let me fucking Jesus Christ. I can't like at any point out before we jump into a hole. Jesus.
I understand the story. Historically, there's like 13 to 15 million people repulsed.
I think the number's actually a little lower. I thought it was a bit high. What he says is, I think he means border encounters. I don't even know if I want to fight on this one. I feel like it's so sticky talking to people because I don't know if I can bring up anything without it like going into a whole other fucking rabbit hole of conspiratorial nonsense. Oh my god.
Stop in the United States illegally. That's like the whole history of illegal immigration in the United States. But hey, maybe I'm wrong there, right? So we can say that that's an example of us living in a fundamentally different reality.
Well, the Pew Research Group has established quite conclusively that the variability over the last 20 years for illegal migration to the south border is between 300,000 and 1.2 million.
Well, the Pew Research can only establish, I think, the number of people attempting to cross. I don't know if they can. No, I don't know if Pew does like census analysis. I'd have to see.
Well, I don't. Well, that's a different issue, right?
Sure.
Because I don't know how you measure how many illegal immigrants there are actually in the country.
I understand. I
given
just want
that
to
they're
point out.
illegal.
I just want to point.
That's such a. They see that's a good point. He has the knowledge. It's in his brain. There you go. Right. It is hard to measure. That's true.
Out. I agree with you. I listened to a lot of Rush Limbaugh growing up. I understand the fear of having a government agency say climate change, therefore we have a blank check to do whatever we want. That's scary.
Which is what they are doing.
The conservatives do the same thing, though.
I'm not
They
claiming
did it,
otherwise.
Yeah, but the problem is, I think people don't talk about it. So, for instance, I heard. So we can pretend now that the conservative argument was just compulsory vaccines are bad because they infringe my freedom. That wasn't the conservative argument. The conservative argument was that mass deaths were going to happen, mass side effects were going to happen. There was going to be all this corruption and stuff related to vaccine distribution, to the crazier theories, the microchips, blah, blah, blah. None of that came true. Absolutely none of the conservative fear-mongering related to the mRNA vaccines came to fruition. But now that's all forgotten. And that was
What do you
used
mean
as an
none of it?
excuse
What
to-
do you make of the?
Imagine being able to transition academic papers, textbooks, websites, emails, or PDFs into an audio format that you can listen to while on the move. The Listening app offers exactly this. It's a convenient and flexible solution for those who want to learn anytime, anywhere. The Listening app offers lifelike AI voices, complete with emotion and intonation for a realistic listening experience. It allows you to indulge in your love for reading and learning, even when you're on the go. Take your studying to the next level by uploading your notes and listening to them on the Listening app. With their note-taking feature, every time you come across a key idea, simply click the Add Note button, and the app instantly adds the last few sentences to the notepad, enhancing your learning experience. Have you ever experienced motion sickness while trying to read your favorite book during a journey? The Listening app.
What is a day zero exploit?
It allows you to easily
A day zero exploit is an exploit that exists in some piece of software, hardware, whatever, that nobody knows about. There's not published information about it. So you can use it to exploit a system, assuming that the other person doesn't have a defense.
Just go to listening.com/Jordan and use code Jordan at checkout. That's listening.com/Jordan and use code Jordan at checkout today.
Forgotten, and that was used
What do you
as
mean
an
none of it?
excuse
What
to
do you
just-
make of the excess deaths?
For related to vaccines, there are almost none. The mRNA vaccines have been administered to
Excess
for
deaths
related
in
to
Europe.
vaccines.
Random question. You still going to debate Vinny from the PPD podcast? No, they said that they dodged that. I don't know why. They just said that after that.
Almost none. The mRNA vaccines have been administered to
Excess
for
deaths
related
in
to
Europe.
vaccines.
We don't know. No. We don't know.
Absolutely know. We absolutely.
Wait
This
a
is like
second. What do
settled
we know?
science.
What do we know?
In terms of vaccine-related.
No. That's not my question. Excess deaths in Europe are up about 20%, and they have been since the end of the COVID
Sounds
pandemic.
really high to me. 20%.
Go look. Go
I'll
look.
check afterwards. But is this including like the Ukrainian war with Russia?
No, it's not including the Ukrainian war.
Okay.
No,
What
no,
are you implying that you think it's because of vaccines?
I'm not
or-
implying anything. I'm
Well, but
saying,
you're-
I hate that. That's so disingenuous. I'm not implying anything after he brings up excess deaths in response to me talking about the vaccines. It's such an obvious implication. And I think I actually make him own this point later, right?
what the excess deaths are.
But
Now,
what is your take on what's causing it?
well,
You
the
said that in-
simplest-
I don't even know if like what are excess deaths Europe. Somebody emailed me and said they were like 7 or 6% or something. I don't know what the actual excess deaths Europe over last year. Let's see some mortality. This is month over month, right? For 2023. So what was the total by the end of the year here?
Now you see me.
I
Now
mean,
you don't.
I guess it's going to be year over year, probably 6.5%, maybe? Maybe 6%? 20% is, that would be, maybe like 6% is.
The joke's on you.
What's excess? How can they know how many will die? Well, it's just based on prior numbers, basically. So they try to guess what the numbers should look like next year. And if more people are dying than average, then there's like a percentage increase for excess.
And you said that in a counter to me describing mRNA vaccines,
Oh,
you said,
good
well,
job.
the excess deaths are 20%. That makes it the implication is that the vaccines are causing
Well,
it, or
some, okay, first of all,
I've got a lot
something
of weight
is
on my-
causing it.
well, at that obviously, yeah.
Something is causing it, or some combination of factors.
Sure.
Now, one possibility is that the healthcare systems were so disrupted by our insane focus on the COVID epidemic that we're still mopping up as a consequence of
Our
it.
insane focus. Like, in other words, people with COVID were going to hospitals and it was clogging our hospitals up. But he finds a way to, like, make that malevolent on the hospital part.
Wait, are these excess deaths tracing back through COVID as well?
Post-COVID,
Just post-COVID.
post-COVID.
Okay.
Right, they're terrifying. Right, they're terrifying. And they're not well publicized. And
Excess trust, the fact that you're speaking to them right now seems like
yeah, but I ferret down a lot of rabbit holes. It's not like it's front bloody page news on the
I feel like excess deaths were the only things we were talking about during 2021, 2022. People were talking so much about the excess deaths, how you estimate deaths that weren't accounted for properly in hospitals or the true impact of COVID or whatever.
This
Like,
will be
but okay.
New York Times.
sure, but I think excess deaths that's a metric that you can Google, and I'm pretty sure there are like 3 different huge organizations that track excess deaths around the world. And
There are many more than 3, yes, in every single European country. Right. Okay, well, so one relatively straightforward hypothesis is that it's a consequence of the disruption of the healthcare system, the staving off of cancer treatment, etc., the increase in depression, anxiety, suicidality, and alcoholism that was a consequence of the lockdown.
Oh, this is where he got it.
Here we go.
3,123 excess deaths, 4,164 excess deaths, 22.5%, 26.4%, 19.8%. And we see this all the way through the year. Deaths being above what we would expect, apart from slightly below on week 10, slightly below on week 14, and slightly below on week 429. Otherwise, all the other weeks where there's data, this is basically up to week 30, which is 36,316 excess deaths. It is clear the excess deaths were not limited to.
Are you gonna have another debate with Jordan if he wants to? Do you realize that blocking people on Twitter gives them the feeling of having the upper hand? Seems kind of productive. No, it doesn't. Especially if they're just trying to dick ride your attention, which is what most of the Grubber people do.
Now you don't.
Who is this guy? This is a nurse that started off doing analysis of research that was coming out at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And a lot of his initial analysis was like insightful and seems to be able to read medical literature and say some facts of people in a pretty effective manner. And somewhere down a few months, I don't know what happened or why or when, he started to go down the huge conspiracy rabbit hole to where his interpretations of things and the data that he chose to look at became super conspiratorial. And now he's basically like a COVID alarmist and anti-vaxxer relating to mRNA vaccines and that. Basically, if you're conservative and you hate everything I'm saying right now and you want the best anti-vax, the best COVID is killing, or is a fake pandemic and blah, blah, blah. If you want all that, this guy's channel is the way to go, because this is where a lot of that shit is based from, basically. European excess deaths, official excess deaths, record excess deaths. Yeah, this is the guy. This is probably where where these talking points are coming from, my guess. JB tries to meme again as a Euro expert, hoping that his opponents are insecure and making it all, and off gets away with it. Frustrating. Cool.
It's the economic disruption. And there's plenty of reason to believe that some of that is the case. But the other obviously glaring possibility is that injecting billions of people with a vaccine that was not tested by any stretch of the imagination with the thoroughness that it should have before it was forced upon people also might be a contributing factor, partly because we know that it led to a rise in myocarditis among young men. And we also know that there was absolutely no reason whatsoever to ever recommend that vaccine was delivered to young children. The risk of death of COVID was so close to zero that it might as well have been
When
zero.
we're talking about a disease, the risk of death isn't the only thing you can worry about.
So you're talking about transmission? Because that was another thing that...
He's like, we want to jump right immediately to the next talking point. Oh my god.
Only thing that you worry about. There's also
So you're
long-term-
talking about transmission? Because that was another thing that the
we can talk
COVID
about
vaccine pushed.
transmission.
Yeah,
We
but
can-
it didn't
hold on.
do anything
We
to
can talk-
transmission.
It absolutely did because it decreased your chance of getting infected. It didn't destroy. It didn't get rid of transmission, but it reduced
Yeah,
transmission.
but
by
it was
reducing your chance of getting-
claimed that it would get rid of
Only if
transmission.
you take one reading of one single quote. I think that
Oh, give
Biden
me a
said one
break.
time where he said, "No, come on, I've heard so many."
I'm incorrect here. It's actually a bunch of bad readings of a bunch of quotes. I thought it was just one bad quote that it was coming from. People have fabricated a ton of quotes retroactively now. You can see that on my Twitter when I argued against that one guy who was supposed to be having a COVID debate with me who seemed to duck out. But
Times conservatives say, "Oh, you can't take anything Trump says seriously." Biden one time on the news says, "If you get the vaccine, you won't
That
transmit
is
the
so
disease."
silly.
Which was a-
Do you know that our Prime Minister in Canada deprived Canadians of the right to travel for 6 months because the unvaccinated were going to transmit COVID with more likelihood than the vaccinated? So this wasn't one bloody statement. This was
no,
like
hold on.
thorough
What
government policy in
I'm
my
saying is
country.
there wasn't a statement given that if you get vaccinated, there is a 0%.
I and everyone I know actually believed the vaccine would prevent us from getting COVID. No, you didn't. Nobody believed that at the time. I wish I would have remembered this for this debate, but the best knockdown argument for this was when Hutch came in, and he reminded me of the fucking meme at the time, which was the meme at the time was everybody was fucking memeing about which vaccine you got. Did you get the Pfizer one? Did you cuck out and get the Moderna one? Or did you super cuck out and get the J&J one? Everybody was talking about the protective percentage for the protection, the immune. What was it? I don't know whether you got like the 96% back or 97%. Like that was this idea that everybody thought that all the vaccines were 100% effective is retarded. The only people who thought that were conservatives that weren't listening to any real news that wouldn't get it anyway. Like the only people that thought that are irrelevant because you guys were never getting vaccinated because you're ready to throw whatever anti-establishment dipshit will tell you whatever the fuck you want to hear because it makes you feel better than everybody else. You feel better than the world. This is stupid shit. Yeah, but I remember these memes. These memes were super prevalent.
Chance of transmitting the disease. The idea is that vaccines were supposed to help because
Fine,
it
well,
reduces your hospitalization, it reduces death, and it reduces transmission, hopefully by making it so that people don't get sick or don't get sick for as long. All three of those things the vaccines did exceedingly well. They continue to do it to this day, but especially for the first variant and then the Delta variant, the vaccines helped immensely there. They were tested. The myocarditis rates are like 7 out of 100,000 injections, and the myocarditis is generally acute. And it's certainly not as bad as even getting the coronavirus itself, which will lead you also to
It's a
having
much worse side effect than side effects that have caused other vaccines to be taken off the market before. So,
a
but
7 out of 100.
I don't think the memes are a great representation of the public's perception of what was going on. What do you think a meme is, you fucking retard? What do you think the term meme or memetics, what do you think this even comes from? As an analogy to, or as an analog to genetics or genes. The whole point is that memes represent some like cultural idea or cultural phenomenon that become widespread as a result of that. It wouldn't make sense for a meme to be incredibly popular if it wasn't indicative of some sort of cultural or societal truth. It wouldn't make any sense.
100,000 rate of acute myocarditis or pericarditis is not a worse side effect than any other vaccine. I think that is a completely acceptable, given that the disease itself is more likely to cause myocarditis or pericarditis.
yes, I don't think the data suggests support that presupposition anymore. The latest peer-reviewed studies show that that's simply not true, especially among young men.
So there is an age bracket of young men where the elevated rate of myocarditis infection might have been.
Why is it that I totally forgot about that and truly believed that I thought the vaccine was 100% effective? Like, it's crazy how you mentioning the meme made me remember that suddenly. Oh, I don't know.
Higher of young.
But that's simply not true, especially among young men.
So there is an age bracket of young men where the elevated rate of myocarditis, acute myocarditis from the vaccine, might have been higher. But we're talking about like 3 or 4 cases per 100,000 people. And again, myocarditis carditis are generally acute conditions.
Well,
They don't last for very long.
I told you at the beginning of this conversation that the progressive left is on the side of the pharmaceutical companies.
It's not about being on the side of the pharmaceutical companies. It's about
Really?
really, yeah. It's
Yeah, well,
about,
I
like,
see. So what I see as the unholy part of that alliance with the pharmaceutical companies is that it dovetails with the radical utopians' willingness to use power to impose their utopian vision.
Well, then what do you
Because
make of the
otherwise,
fact
how
that-
would you explain it? Because the left.
How I can't tell if this is exhausting or if it's just comforting to have a worldview like this, where every single possible thing is explained by this conspiratorial network of bad, malevolent actors that are trying to destroy society. My God.
That were most skeptical about the bloody pharmaceutical companies, and they jumped on the vaccine bandwagon. And
JP may be getting confused with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is removed for young people in the UK due to health complications. Was it young people or was it old people? I thought AstraZeneca was increasing, or AstraZeneca or whatever. I thought that was increasing strokes in like. Was it just young people? I thought it was like just. And also, it was still a really low increase as well. But
An enemy has been slain.
exactly the same way that you're doing right now.
pharmaceutical companies have helped us tremendously
Yeah,
throughout the
right. There we go. Fine. No,
think modern
I don't
medicine
think
hasn't?
so. No, I don't think
Then
so.
you're just wrong.
I think they're
You're
utterly
completely wrong.
I see. So you don't think that the pharmaceutical companies who dominate the advertising landscape was
have you seen Anthony Magnabosco's Street Epistemology series? Impressed by his rational engagement with concepts he believes rooted in faith and such motion. Wait, aren't you talking about Peter Boghossian, or did they do that together?
except the pharmaceutical
Ironically, AstraZeneca wasn't even mRNA. I know that's a funny talking point to watch conservatives wrestle with. Like, bro, there were non-mRNA vaccines, and some of them had side effects. Yeah.
companies who dominate the advertising landscape with 75% of the funding are corrupt.
I don't. Corrupt is a
Corrupt.
very broad.
No, it's
Do you think that?
corrupt
Do you think
with a
that?
tinge of malevolence,
Do you think
willing to extract money out of people by putting their health on the line. You don't believe that?
Do you think that we get effective drugs from pharmaceutical companies?
Not particularly.
Okay.
Like, I don't even know where I'm at this point. This is why I feel like this interview was so, like, Jesus Christ. I'm like so defeated. What are we even talking about at this point?
Do you think that any vaccines work?
Yes.
Do you think that any?
I don't think 80 of them work. At once.
Vaccines are even. Ordinary vaccine schedule, USA. I don't know the number of.
Shut down.
We've got from birth to 18 months. Does this mean you're getting 2 separate injections?
A little
So I wonder if you count this as the same vaccine or different vaccines. If I count every injection on its own, we've got 2, 4, 5, 7, 11, 19. And then from 18 to 18. 829.
here we go.
What is this green shit? 3, 34, 5, 36, 36. It's like 43, 42, around 40, I guess.
Ally has been slain.
If we're counting each of these as different vaccinations, which I don't think most people would, but do you think he means the available vaccines, including all the competitors? No, people just have this idea that, like, after the COVID vaccine came out, that children were... basically, that old theory of autism is caused by vaccines started to come up again. And now people think that the vaccine schedule was way too much. Literally just completely based on emotions. There's no actual argument for why it's too much. It's just it feels bad, and then people throw out numbers, and it's like... Okay.
Do you think that any?
I don't think 80 of them work.
Like, even at that, let's say the number was 80. Why don't you think 80?
Now
Like,
you don't.
At once. For babies. I think that's a little risky.
But yet we.
the ultimate problem is that the mRNA used new technology, and this was just never conveyed to the public effectively. People are stupid. I feel like when most people say the issue was this or that, I feel like it's actually just retarded conservatives that never were going to get vaccinated anyway. That's what it feels like. Like I feel like I could wander into like a conservative cope session on vaccines, and they're like, well, the big problem was if you wanted to get vaccinated, you had to get vaccinated by purple fire-breathing dragons. And I'm like, what the fuck? I've never heard of this in my life. Well, that's what everybody's talking about. And when they say everybody, they mean that in their conservative circles, they all thought that purple fire-breathing dragons were the ones doing the vaccine. Nobody else thought this. This is like in your wild as fuck circles, and you guys weren't gonna get vaccinated anyway for whatever reason, right? Like,
You've bet on this vaccine. Do you think that any...
I don't think 80 of them work
An enemy has
at
been
once
slain.
for babies. I think that's a little risky.
But yet we've bet on this vaccine schedule for how many decades?
Like
There's no-
this,
no-
like this, not like this, not carefully.
I had a ton of vaccines when I was a child. I'm pretty sure that was the norm for people. There were
the funniest thing is that, like, and there's no way to run it twice, so conservatives would never be honest about this. But the funny thing is if mRNA vaccines had been created first,
Ally has been slain.
to where, oh, you take the protein that you want to train your body against, or rather a piece of mRNA that helps you manufacture the protein that your body is going to fight against. If mRNA vaccines had been created first, and then we created the attenuated virus vaccines after, shit. Because in those vaccines, you're taking an actual, I think it's, you're taking an actual virus that's like been weakened in a way to reduce its effectiveness in your body, and you're injecting that into your body, an actual live human killing murder virus into your body to train. I don't think those vaccines would have ever made it off the ground, even though that's like a standard vaccine type, are the live attenuation ones. It would have never. Yeah. In fact, actually, most people probably don't even know about those types of vaccines. I bet if I described that Pfizer has a new technology that lets us take a weakened virus and inject it into people, that this is a way that maybe we could try. I bet people would immediately, out of hand, say that that's horrible and crazy. I never know what's going to inject me with a fucking virus.
ton of vaccines.
There's way more now.
Okay. And you think
Well,
that...
you can understand why. I mean, look, part of it, no doubt, part of it is a consequence of the genuine willingness to protect children. But the moral hazard is quite clear, and people on the left used to be aware of this.
What do you make of the fact?
can-
Where do you think the mRNA vaccine, the speeding up of it, came from? How do you make for the fact that it was Donald Trump that did
Terror.
warp speed?
Terror,
So you-
foolish panicking, just like we're doing with the climate issue.
So you think Trump
Foolish
was
panicking.
he in bed with the pharmaceuticals? Was he working with the left, or was it just that was the only panicky thing he made? He didn't try to push for the mass lockdowns like other far left people would have wanted him to do. That was just the one mistake he made, was pushing for the vaccine.
No, I think Trump undoubtedly made all sorts of mistakes, and it certainly wasn't only the
That's kind of reasonable, though, isn't it? Like, the problem wasn't that it was. The problem was that it was new. Still retarded, but I bet they'd own that. No, that wasn't the problem. And I said this way back when. Because I asked people, you can probably go back and make a compilation of, like, how long do you think you need to see if they're safe or not? And people would say, like, 3 years, 5 years. Bullshit. No, they won't. They'll never change their... No, they're not going to change their mind on this. Unless maybe they have different political candidates that they fall in view with, and then eventually they'll change their belief that way. But they're never going to change their mind on, like, the COVID vaccines. Never. No, that'll never happen.
the left that stampeded toward the forced COVID vaccine debacle. But it was most surprising to me that it emerged on the left, because the left at least had been protected against the depredations of gigantic predatory corporations by their skepticism of the gigantic enterprises that can engage in regulatory capture, and that just vanished.
Is it not possible that maybe people looked and they said, hey, all the governments, all the institutions, all the schools, all the private companies across all the countries around the world are saying the same thing?
Yeah.
Maybe it is the case that this vaccine will help. Is that not possible?
Oh, sure, of course it's possible, but that didn't mean it was right. They used force.
And then we switch from the motivations now to the application, like, completely.
They used force.
We use force for all sorts of things in terms of public
We don't
health.
generally use force to invade people's bodies.
How long have vaccine mandates been a thing in Canada, the United States, and the entire world?
I don't think they should have been a thing.
That's great if you don't think they should have been, but when you say we don't generally use force, we absolutely use force. We use, we've enforced vaccines for a long time. It's an important part of public health.
Fair enough. We did it on a scale and at a rate during the COVID pandemic, so-called pandemic, that was unparalleled. And the consequence of that was that we injected billions of people with an experimental, it wasn't a bloody vaccine.
You think if vaccines were nasal sprays or pills rather than injections, that people would be more willing? No.
Billions of people with an experimental, and it wasn't a bloody vaccine. Just no, it wasn't. No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
It's
What,
not.
doesn't it have a 100% success rate? You think it's the definition of vaccine? Well, the point of the vaccine is to give your body a protein to train on so that your immune system works. Who cares if it's not the plenty of
The word vaccine so that they didn't have to pretend the fact that it wasn't the same technology.
There are different types of vaccines
There certainly are.
that are different technologies.
Fine.
The mRNA vaccines is a type
This
of
used to
vaccine
be
technology.
vaccine. Now this is vaccine.
No, it was like this, and now it's like this.
No. It was like this, and now it's like this. The mRNA technology was a radical, qualitative leap forward in technology. You can call it a vaccine if you want to, but it bears very little resemblance to any vaccine that went before that.
What is vaccine? Do I ask him this? What do you mean when you say vaccine? What does that mean to you?
The reason it was called a vaccine was because vaccine was a brand name that had a track record of safety, and shoehorning it in that was one of the ways to make sure that people weren't terrified of the technology. And
I
you
think
know,
the
I
reason
can
it's called a vaccine
understand.
is because they're injecting something.
Is that true,
I think
actually?
it's inoculating you against something in the future because it has protein.
Was vaccine initially a brand name? I don't even know. Where does the name vaccine? I don't know where the name vaccine comes from. What about like the etymology? Etymology. He's speaking figuratively. Okay, I didn't know if it was actually like Kleenex or something.
And
I
you
think
know,
the reason
I
it's called a
understand.
vaccine is because they're injecting something that's inoculating you against something in the future because these proteins resemble a virus that
There
infects
are
your immune system
overlaps
trained against.
between the mRNA technologies and vaccines, to be sure, but they wouldn't have been put forward.
They're not overlap. It's functionally what it is.
Technologies and vaccines, to be sure, but they wouldn't have been put forward with the rate that they were put forward if they weren't a radical new technology. And it's bad in principle.
What do you make of the definition of vaccines change the CDC? It's a dumb fucking talking point. And I think it has to refer very specifically to like a patent or something. I looked this up a long time ago. I've forgotten all of the retarded conspiracies around vaccines. A vaccine is some form of inoculating agent that you're giving your body, something to help you train against a virus in the future. There are plenty of different technologies to do this. Every vaccine that came before COVID wasn't based on just the same technology. You've got live attenuated viruses, you've got completely dead things. There are multiple forms of the early inoculation of shit was like rubbing disease shit on people or in sores. Didn't George Washington? Am I making this up? Okay, hold on. I'm about to say something. I don't remember if I'm making this up. Were they going to cross the Delaware or some bullshit in George Washington's early army? If you got a sore, did they rub a blanket with smallpox against like open wounds? Am I making this up or did this happen? There are tons of different technologies that have been used for inoculation in the past. I don't remember if I'm making this up or not. Smallpox, rubbed, sores, inoculation. Oh, maybe it's a myth. WebMD. Material from smallpox sources inhaled or rubbed into the skin. It was hoped that it would give the smallpox to replace the practice. I don't know. Maybe this is a meme. Maybe it's not true. Blowing smallpox material up the nose of the child being inoculated. Insufflation. Okay.
To inject billions of people with an untested new technology.
Isn't it
And
also
it's
bad in principle for billions of people to get infected with a worldwide pandemic that initially was causing a decent number of deaths, a ton of complications, shutting down world economies?
Maybe it was. Maybe it was.
Maybe.
Shouldn't we be able to
looks like-
engage in that analysis and figure out, like, if we look at the
We're
side
not
effects of the
engaging
vaccine?
in the
No,
analysis.
because now we're talking about whether or not
pretending that nothing
vaccines are even
happened.
vaccines or not instead.
No, don't play that game. That is not what I was doing. I was making a very specific and careful case. The mRNA technology, by wide recognition, is an extraordinarily novel technology. And
That
you can
doesn't make
call
it not a vaccine, though.
Well, okay, it's a radically transformed form of vaccine. I don't
We
give a
make
damn.
updates,
That still makes it something so new that the potential danger of its mass administration was highly probable to be at least or more dangerous than the thing that it was supposed to protect against. And we are seeing that in the excess
We are
deaths.
absolutely not saying. So are you implying none of the
Yeah,
excess deaths
right.
were caused by the vaccines? Or
I'm glad I remembered this point to bring it back to this.
I don't bloody well know what they're
That's what you're
caused by.
implying now.
Well, look, if you're going to use Occam's razor, you're kind of stuck in an awkward place here.
I'm
Because you got-
absolutely not stuck in it. This is
Yes.
the most administered vaccine in the or inoculation, or whatever you prefer to call it, in the history of all of mankind. Every single organization around the world is
If Destiny reads these, but would you ever do a religious debate? Fuck no. Maybe in the
motivated.
future.
We're going to call it the history of all of mankind. Every single organization around the world is motivated to call this out if it was a bad thing. You don't think Russia or China would be screaming if Donald Trump or the United States warp sped through a vaccine that was having deleterious effects on populations all around the world? You don't think there wouldn't be some academic institution? You don't think there'd be more than a handful of doctors and Joe Rogan and some conservatives saying this vaccine might have been bad if it was the case that American companies working with companies in Europe and Germany especially, right, because that's where BioNTech is from, in order to create or manufacture a vaccine that was causing excess deaths all around the world? There are so many different people that would be motivated to call this out. How do you explain
They
the
are
fact that
calling it out.
no, it's a handful of people? Where are the governments
Look,
calling it out? Where are
it's
the
always
academic institutions calling it out? Where are the other private companies calling it out? Wouldn't you stand to make a killing if you were a private company in Europe and you could say, look, the mRNA vaccines for sure are causing all of these issues?
Yeah, why wouldn't Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca, why wouldn't any of these people, or the Chinese vaccine that they developed, or the one they developed in Russia, why wouldn't they?
Why wouldn't Putin? Why wouldn't Xi Jinping? Why wouldn't anybody else in the world call this out if it was as horrible as it was?
There are plenty of people attempting to call
Pivot.
out
Nobody
the-
credible and no huge institution.
What do you make of the
I like the lean forward.
Call-
Nobody credible and no huge institution.
What do you make of the excess deaths? You haven't come up with a bloody hypothesis.
I don't even know if there are 20% at the excess deaths in Europe right now. If I had to guess off the top of my head, it's going to be.
I remember heat waves in France. I think in France, don't people always die in heat waves in France? I feel like there was a big series of that over the past 4 years. I don't know if food or energy issues across Europe after the Ukraine war were an issue, and then probably just people dying from COVID. These would be my guesses right now. What did I say here?
Like you said, one might be lingering effects of an overall healthcare system. Another one might be
that too.
deaths related to the war in Ukraine.
Okay,
Another
yeah.
one might be rising energy costs that have
But it's
happened for a couple of
absolutely
years.
Okay, yeah, all right,
impossible
good,
that
okay.
any of it could be unintended consequences of a novel technology injected into billions of people.
I think that if excess, first of all, there aren't billions of people in Europe. So if there were
didn't say
excess
there
deaths,
were.
I understand, but you're talking about excess deaths in Europe. I'm not aware of excess deaths that exist in other places that are completely and totally unaccounted for, where the only explanation would be the vaccine. I think if there
Well-
were, I think more people would be talking about it.
Well, first of all, the number of people talking about something is not an indication of the scientific validity of a claim.
I
Quite the
agree with that,
contrary.
but for a
Well, then why
vaccine that
are
was-
you using mass consensus as the determinant of what constitutes
Because
truth?
I think for
That's
something,
never been the case.
Because I think for something that was given to billions and billions of people, if this was something that was having a measurable effect on people, it would be impossible to cover it up or ignore it.
Well,
We
what do
wouldn't
you-
have to look at the one
All
case
right.
brought up on a documentary. We would have to look at the one thing being talked about.
Then what do you make
but
of the VAERS data?
the
There's more negative side effects reported from the mRNA vaccines than there were reported for every single vaccine ever created since the dawn of time, and not by a small margin. So it's not just the excess deaths.
I agree.
It's the VAERS data.
What is VAERS data?
It's the
That
data.
was dirty. Oof. I don't normally quiz people. I must have been triggered to ask him that. I don't normally ask people a clarifying question like that, but I wonder why I felt confident doing it here. I wonder if I was just so irritated by all the misinformation that I.
Just the excess deaths.
I agree.
It's the VAERS data.
What is VAERS data?
It's the database that until the COVID-19 pandemic emerged and we had the unfortunate consequence that there were so many side effects being reported, it was the gold standard for determining whether or not vaccines were safe. And now as soon as it started to misbehave on the mRNA,
Did he respond correctly? Not really. That's why I don't know why I asked it, because I don't think I call him out. Or I think I explained afterwards, right? VAERS, I don't even know what it fucking stands for. VAERS. Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting would be my guess. VAERS. That's probably what it stands for. System? Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, yeah. VAERS is just like if you get a shot, if you go home, if anything bad happens to you, you call your doctor and you say, hey, this happened, and then they put it in a spreadsheet. That's all VAERS is. It's not a study. It's not well researched. It's not confirming any actual stat. It's just saying like, hey, yesterday I got vaccinated. Today I tried to fuck my wife, and for some reason I'm having trouble getting an erection today. Can you write this down? And then they write it down. If enough stuff shows up in a VAERS database, people will look into it. Like, oh, a lot of people are reporting this type of reaction to a particular thing. But VAERS, I mean, when you're bringing unprecedented attention to a particular vaccine, people are going to be way more noticing any health effect that's happening after a vaccine. They're going to call in and report these things. That doesn't necessarily mean they were caused by the vaccine. VAERS doesn't establish causal links. It just gives you a temporal link between a thing and a thing, a vaccine and a side effect, right? I got vaccinated 2 days ago, and now I have a headache. So you call in and you might report it. That's it. It doesn't mean the vaccine caused it. It's just reporting to give you a link between two things. And then eventually there'll be research to see if there's something scary there.
vaccine front, we decided that we were going to doubt the validity of the VAERS reporting system.
Okay, the VAERS reporting system never been the gold standard for anything. VAERS reporting is just if you want to report that there is some issue that you have after getting a vaccine. That's it.
Yeah.
I think it's
What do you mean
vaccine
that's it?
adverse.
What the hell do you think it was set up for?
To report adverse events
Why?
that happen after a vaccine.
Why?
To track and see if something was related to the vaccine.
Right.
So
Why?
most people didn't even know VAERS existed
True.
until after the COVID vaccine.
Yep.
Once people know that it exists, of course more people are going to engage with it. But what happens
So
when
it's
you
all
submit a report?
noise.
No, it could be or it couldn't be. So what do? When a bunch of stuff
Well, you first of all might begin
when
by
it-
suggesting
My
that maybe
God.
it's not all noise.
Correct. So when
Especially
all
given
of
the
these
excess
things are
deaths.
admitted to VAERS, what they do is from there they investigate. All you can do, all VAERS is I might go and get a vaccine, and maybe in 3 days I go, I got a headache. I'm gonna go.
It's a genuine question. Did we ever even need these vaccines given the mortality rate? This was the most infectious disease in the history of the entire planet. What do you mean? Did we ever need these vaccines? Pretty sure excess deaths in conservative communities that weren't getting vaccinated had a huge departure from those that did afterwards. Yeah, of course. What are you talking about? Having a fuck ton of people getting infected and clogging up hospitals and shit was really bad.
Go ahead and call my doctor and make this report, and they'll say, okay, well, it's an adverse event after vaccine. Doesn't mean the vaccine caused the headache. And now that more people
I
know
didn't
about
say
this
it
system
meant
than
it.
ever,
I'm
sure,
saying
I'm
that
just
the
saying that
VAERS
VAERS is
system
not
was-
the gold standard of determining if a vaccine
Compared
is working
to
or not.
what?
Compared to actual longitudinal, prospective, randomized controlled trial
You
studies.
mean like the ones they should have done to the goddamn vaccines?
Like the ones that they did do for the vaccines, and they continue to do to this day. Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
You really
That
think
is how that obviously that is what the studies were. Yeah.
that you're in a position to evaluate the scientific credibility of
It's 99% meme, Destiny. 99% of people were fine. That's not what matters. COVID misinformation is the thing that makes me feel the most homicidal of all the topics that I cover, okay? This is one of the cases where we have to talk about absolute number because the absolute number actually matters here, okay? If you have a disease that is fine for 99% of people, kills 1% of people, and hospitalizes 5% of people, that doesn't matter if only a small percentage of society gets affected. But if everybody gets infected, that 1 in 5% number, even though it might be a low percentage of the overall population, is a huge absolute number that hospitals can't deal with. That's why when the vaccines came out, we were talking about social distancing and all that shit, we were talking about flattening the curve. What the fuck do you think that referred to?
the trials for the vaccines, do you?
No,
Really?
I don't. So I have to trust.
Then what are you
I
doing?
have to do, what
I
have,
don't trust
I
them.
have
I
to
looked at
trust
the bloody
I have
data.
First of all, you have to trust third parties to some extent. When you go outside,
I don't have to trust
Of course
third-
you do. You do every day. When you turn the keys in your car,
I
you
can't believe he wanted to fight on this point. What do you mean you don't trust third parties? I should have just asked him about his clinical practice. Did you do all the research for a psychoanalysis? Did you do all the research for any drug? Because he was just like, did he go to medical school? I thought he did, right? So you could like prescribe drugs. How do you know if any of these drugs work? Do you just trial and error them on all your patients?
extent. When you go outside,
I don't have to trust
Of course
third-
you do. You do every day. When you turn the keys in your car, you hope your engine doesn't explode. When you're drinking water, you hope that the public water or whatever tap or bottled water you got it out of isn't contaminated or
He
poisoned.
didn't go to
with
med school?
cholera.
I
Is he
don't believe
just
that
is it just PhD?
As a consequence of consensus?
No, you of course you do.
No, I don't. I do that as a consequence of observing multiple times that when I put the goddamn key in the ignition, the truck started.
Why do you know it's going to start the 50th or the 100th time? How
Don't
many
play
times do you wear
Hume
the...
with me. You
I'm
know
not
perfectly
playing
well
Hume.
why.
You don't know if the denim in those jeans isn't leaking into your bloodstream. To some extent, we have to trust third-party institutions to make
Except when they
determinations.
use
I thought here, and I didn't because I didn't want to do like I don't know if it has some
moving,
personal thing,
please.
and I try to stay away from these. But I thought about going in here like when you went to Russia for your treatment and you have like an induced coma and all of this stuff, you're giving literally an infinite amount of trust to people around you that they're going to take care of you and operate in a proper way to deal like appropriate medical treatment and not harm you, whatever. Right? Like this is the ultimate moving
30 seconds until minions
moving something from
spawn.
one person to another. Delegate? It's not delegating. I always want to say delegate, but there's a better word. But you're
The forest
what am I
told
thinking of?
many
What is Hume? Hume is a
stories.
philosopher, and he was trying to pull on some, I don't know, Hume for some inductive reasoning there. So I don't fuck Hume and fuck philosophy. But yeah, this is like the ultimate. You're moving trust onto another party or whatever. Transference of trust, I guess. Yeah.
Then we have to trust third-party institutions to make
except when they
determination.
use force. How about
Especially
that?
when they use force. We trust the police officers. We trust the
We
judicial
do, Abe. We
system.
do. We on the left trust the police.
To some extent, do we? If somebody's breaking
That's
into your
why
house,
we
who do you
defund
call?
them.
I'm not a defunder, but if somebody's breaking into your house, you can be the most defund person in the world. Who are you gonna call? Are you gonna call your neighbor? Are you gonna call
Ghostbusters?
Joe Biden? Are you gonna call Obama? Are you gonna call the Black
I should have said the Ghostbusters here.
Panthers? You're gonna call the
Okay,
cops.
so tell me this. Tell me this then, because the core issue.
Would you be okay with COVID vaccinations actually forced by the military? Yeah, probably. They probably do force vaccinations. That'd be my guess. Don't they make you take flu shots if you're in the military? Bro, you get so many vaccines in the military. Or at least my parents told me you used to.
Here is use of force, as far as I'm concerned. We examine some of the weeds around that. Politicians throughout the world, and this would be true on the
Oh, he means by the military on citizens? Oh, that would be kind of weird.
conservative side now, in the aftermath of the COVID
Venture.
tyranny, because it was more a tyranny than a pandemic, are now saying that we actually didn't force anybody to take the vaccine. So what do you think of that, Glenn? Like, so let's define force.
I think it's
Because in
technically
Canada-
true, but I think it's silly.
What do you mean it's technically true? Define
Technically
force,
true,
then.
and that in the United States at
Conquer
least,
the foe
I think the
before
idea,
you.
what they tried to
No
do,
matter
they weren't
how
able to do it
hard.
because the Supreme Court shut it down, was Biden tried to make it so that OSHA, who's the body that regulates job safety, could make it so that employees had to get vaccinated. Now, eventually,
what?
that it was,
Or what?
or they lose their job.
Okay, does that qualify as force?
That's why I said technically,
Yeah, I know,
but
no,
not.
but I'm at, it's a serious question. I mean, because we need to define what constitutes force before we can. It seems to me.
You could argue it's a type of force, sure. I mean, I think it'd be silly to say it's nothing. It is a type of force. It's in terms of cop telling you have to do this, you're going to be killed. No, but it's on the
Right.
spectrum, sure.
I'm reading that mRNA vaccines are far less invasive than traditional vaccines as there is no live virus and the scary spike protein is just some shitty coding that the immune system eats up.
An
No,
ally has been
I wouldn't call it
slain.
less invasive. You're still getting something vaccinated into you. And there are still potentials for it to go very wrong. Like any vaccine can have a multitude of issues that occur for really complicated reasons from what does ADU stand for? Adaptive Diplomatic
Things
Embolism.
aren't always what they seem.
There's a lot of things that can go wrong with a lot of vaccines. It's where you have a maladaptive immune response that actually blocks your cells from being able to kill a virus, but it doesn't actually weaken the virus. ADE, what did that stand for? I did so much fucking vaccine bullshit. Antibody-dependent enhancement. There's a lot of random things that could go wrong in vaccinating somebody. Or some people were saying that the nanolipid particles, or that the spike proteins that your cells produce could end up in your heart and cause inflammation. That was where the myocarditis or something. Like, yeah, you would never say that it's not invasive. A vaccine is almost always going to be invasive, but
Of course, yeah.
It's as much force as.
It's a type of force, sure. I mean, I think it'd be silly to say it's nothing. It is a type of force. It's in terms of cop telling you have to do this, you're going to be killed. No, but it's on the
Right.
spectrum, sure. Of course, yeah.
It's as much force as the mRNA vaccines are vaccines.
Sure. It is a type of force, and the mRNA vaccines
Okay,
are a type of
okay,
vaccine,
so
sure.
I really think the problem was with the COVID response. I really think the problem was the use of force. I mean, I can understand to some degree, although I'm very skeptical of the.
you should have pushed him more on the forced vaccine narrative. It was extremely warranted given the number of deaths. You should have asked him when it can be enforced, if ever. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole argument. I'm trying so hard not to ask questions and to be a little bit more narrow here because our conversation has like expanded so many topics. Yeah.
The pharmaceutical companies, and far more skeptical than
We've seen like a 30% increase in blood clots. No, we haven't. Shut the fuck up.
degree, although I'm very skeptical of the pharmaceutical companies, and far more skeptical than your insistence upon the utility of consensus might lead me to believe you're skeptical of them, which is surprising, I would say, given
I'm
that
very
the
skeptical of them. That's why I'm glad there's multiple companies, multiple countries, multiple academic institutes of research, and the FDA. Yeah, I'm very skeptical. You should be in any private system. You should be skeptical of every private company, of course. Whether we're talking media, pharmaceuticals, or automobile manufacturers, yeah. But skepticism doesn't mean a blind adherence to the complete total opposite of whatever it is they're saying, right? There are undoubtedly, like, if you look at
How about
Alzheimer's
if you're-
research, there's been
There was no justification to mandate them if they didn't stop transmission. They did. They slowed transmission by decreasing the likelihood of you getting infected. That's a reduction in transmission. If you're not getting infected, then there's a less likelihood of you transmitting because you got infected.
You're looking a little green.
Breaking improvement
if
on
you're-
drugs to treat Alzheimer's research over the past 3 years.
be
That 5 years ago, none of
right
these drugs even existed. And now, yeah, so I mean,
How about if you're skeptical of anyone who's willing to use force to put their doctrine forward?
then
How's that
you're
a rule of
skeptical of
thumb?
literally every single person, political ideology ever have existed in all of humankind. Some degree of force, you would undoubtedly believe this, right? Some degree of force is probably necessary for any kind of cohesive society, right?
No, I don't believe that.
Of course there is.
No, I
Even if
don't
you had a
believe
tribe
that.
of 100, 120 people, if somebody was stealing something, right? You could punish that person.
I said earlier that becomes complicated when you're dealing with the psychopathic types. Right, so that's a complication. But I would say, generally speaking, that the necessity to use force is a sign of bad policy. And no, I don't think, see, I'm not particularly Hobbesian. I don't think that the only reason people comport themselves with a certain degree of civility in civilized society is because they're terrified by the fact that the government has a monopoly on force that can be brought against them at any moment. I think that keeps the psychopaths in line to some degree. But I think that most people are enticed into a cooperative relationship, and that formulating the structures that make those relationships possible is a sign of good policy.
I have to ask, because I have watched a lot of stuff in the past. I remember you being very specific on this, that for instance, when two men are communicating with each other, there is an underlying threat of force that kind of puts on the guardrails those particular social interactions. For instance,
Yeah, the threat of forces don't be psychopathic.
What is how broader is psychopathic?
Well, I can define it. I mean,
Yeah, go for it.
well, a psychopath will gain short-term advantage at the cost of long-term relationship.
Okay.
That's really the core issue. Well, you know, you made a reference to something like that earlier in your discussion.
Here's
when you
something
pointed
that
out
won't
that
wash
people
off.
claim to be motivated, let's say,
You're
by
looking
principle,
a
but will
little
default
green.
to short-term gratification, more or less at the
For
drop of
social
a hat.
goods, yeah.
Yeah.
How is the anti-COVID researcher bad faith or ill-informed? Bro, there's a billion other people that have gone and debunked his videos. We've looked at stuff in the past. I'm not interested in going into shit. The selective reading of studies, pretty sure he even pushed that hydroxychloroquine bullshit and the ivermectin bullshit. It's just a trash channel for COVID misinfo or anything related to health misinfo. Or maybe that's changed actually as of recently. I don't know. But I know there were multi-year periods where he fell into that. But there's that Dan the Funk guy or Dave, I don't remember. There's a couple people that have done debunks on things that he's done on his channel, but it's just not. It's dumb.
Yeah, exactly. Well, default to short-term gratification, more or less at the
For
drop of
social
a hat.
goods, yeah.
Yeah.
Is he the one that argued that like aspirating needles was also like super important for vaccines, and he got upset when they started recommending not to aspirate needles anymore or shit like, I don't know.
But will default to short-term gratification, more or less at the
For
drop of
social
a hat.
goods, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the exaggerated
Debunk
proclivity
the
to
funk?
do
Is that
that
the
is
guy?
at the essence of psychopathy. So it's a very, it's
Do you
very
think, I'm curious,
immature.
with this definition of psychopathy, does
It's
that
the
mean like,
definition of psychopathy. It's not it's not mine. That's the core of psychopathy.
okay, I'm not, in the United States, I think we call it all ASPD now.
No, it's separate from, that's antisocial personality disorder.
I thought that subsumed psychopathy and sociopathy.
Psychopathy is psychopathy is more like it's more the pathological core of antisocial personality disorder.
Okay, maybe that might be
So
true, okay.
that's a better way of thinking. Like the worst, a small number of criminals are responsible for the vast majority of crimes. It's 1% commit 65%, something like that.
Do you think, is psychopathy something that can be environmentally induced, or do you think this is core to a person?
It's both. So, for example, if you're disagreeable, like you are, by the way, your proclivity, if you went wrong, would be to go wrong in an antisocial and psychopathic direction. And that's more true of men, for example, than it is for women. That's why men are more likely to be imprisoned by law. 10 to 1, 20 to 1 generally. It depends on the particular crime. With it being higher proportion of men as the violence of the crime mounts. So you can imagine on the genetic versus environment side. So imagine that when you're delivered your temperamental...
Why laugh? It's true that it's both, because like everything is everything, and I feel like it's hard to like actually have a single line of thought or a single, like following a single train of thought, because every single question has every single answer. Like, do you think that climate change has to be done by evil people, or could like good people do it? Well, I think it could be both. Okay, well, like for the people that are trying their best, do you think that they have society's benefit in mind, or do you think they're like selfishly driven? Well, it could be either. Okay, do you think that like when you say like selfishly driven, like do you mean that they're just like, is it selfish for their, I guess, psychological feel good, or like well, it could be a variety of things. It's just like every answer has every answer, every question has every answer, and every answer has every answer, and everything is just like
hand side. So imagine that when you're delivered your temperamental hand of cards, you're going to have a certain set of advantages that go along with them that are part and parcel.
In fairness, you did this too in this convo, kind of. What are you talking about? I feel like I tried to narrow shit down so fucking much. Wait, what part was I doing in this conversation?
That genetic determination, and there's going to be a certain set of temptations as well. So, for example, if you're high in trait neuroticism, you're going to be quite sensitive to the suffering of others.
You're too focused on arguing. Even if you are right, it was fair for him to answer it like that there? No.
Able to detect that, but the cost you'll pay is that you'll be more likely to develop depression and anxiety. And if you're disagreeable, extroverted, and unconscientious, then you're the place you'll go if you go badly is in the psychopath direction. And there are environmental determinants of that to some degree.
I'm just curious for the definition of psychopathy for short-term gain at the expense of long-term
relationship. Really, that's probably the best. Yeah.
When you look at stuff like people that are self-destructive, say people that engage in behaviors like obesity, is that like a type of psychopathy to you, or is that like something different, or how do you define these types of things, I guess, or how do you view that type of thing?
Well, no, there is an overlap in that addictive.
Not really trying to defend him on this, but is it not true that every issue has good people and bad people? Like, it's reductive to the point of view, isn't it, right? No, but it doesn't. If you're making strong claims, if you're making strong statements about, like, climate change is done by malevolent evil actors, okay, well, then let's figure out what we mean when we say that. Then you can't, when pushed on anything, you can't become reductive to the point of absurdity or pointlessness in that everything bleeds into everything. If you're making strong claims initially, well, if you're making strong claims, we need to find the foundation of those strong claims that you believe, and then look at the justifications for those beliefs. So if you believe that it's deductively true, does it logically follow? Or if the premises are true, like, oh, are your actual statements, your initial statements that you're building this argument off of true? But if you make strong statements, then we try to explore those strong statements, every single thing bleeds into everything else. Everything is violence. Everything is force. Everybody is good and evil. Everything is environmental and genetic. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know what the fuck the foundation for any of your beliefs actually are.
Processes, one of which might lead to obesity, do have the problem of the prioritization of the short term. But so that overlaps with the short-term orientation of the psychopath. But a psychopath is, an obese person isn't gaining anything from your demise to facilitate their obesity. Right, so there's a predatory and parasitical element to psychopathy that's not there in other addictive short-term processes.
Do you think it's possible that there are things, then we circle back to the private, isn't it possible that people can commit harms against other people where they're not necessarily gaining from their demise, but it's just some other sort of gain?
Well,
so for instance, let's say like I'm talking to some friends and I'm just gossiping or shit talking another person. I'm not necessarily feeling good that I'm trashing them per se. I'm feeling good because this group of friends might be more favorably because I have like a gossip or something.
Well, but that's the gain right there. And you are contributing to the demise of the people
you're
that you're gossiping about.
But I think there's like, I feel like there's fundamentally different type of thought process between like, I want to tell you something juicy about this guy because it'll make you like me, versus I want to tell you something juicy about this guy because I hate this guy and I want him to like have a worse reputation. I feel like there's different drivers for that.
I would say that's an interesting distinction. I would say probably that the hatred-induced malevolence is a worse form of malevolence than the popularity-inducing malevolence.
Yeah, the only reason
the
only reason I bring that up is because I feel like a lot of malevolence that we have social guardrails for is that type of like selfish malevolence where you're not. I would argue even the majority of malevolence in the world is people acting selfishly or being.
Isn't it better to explain to Peterson why you say the things you believe instead of explaining here in chat why you say? I'm trying to. I don't even know what he's saying. When I'm asking clarifying questions, because I'm trying to figure out what do you actually believe, or what is the claim here? That's why I'm asking clarifying questions. I don't even know what the fuck is being stated at any of these points. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Consider it not necessarily like.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that that's why Dante outlined levels of hell.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, well, exactly that. And I mean, that book was an investigation into the structure of malevolence, right? He put betrayal at the bottom, which I think is right. I think that's right, because people who develop post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, which almost only accompanies an encounter with malevolence rather than tragic circumstances, they are often betrayed. Sometimes by other people, but often by themselves.
Did you read Dante's Inferno? Yes, it's a fucking boring book.
hell. And yes, there are levels of hell, and you outlined a couple there.
So I guess then my question is that if you have people, so the kid
I shouldn't say it's a book, actually. I think technically Zombies is a play, isn't it?
feels an orange from the stamp.
I feel like it was a play. But maybe they wrote a book about it. I think it was a play.
So I guess then my question is just that if you have people, so the kid that steals an orange from the stand, not because he wants to shop all the
Oh, was it a poem? Maybe it was a poem. Sorry, whatever.
because he wants the orange or he's hungry. Without some type of societal, it doesn't have to be the government, it could be family, religious, without some type of use of force, do you think that society ever exists without
Use force on your wife?
Well, what do we consider force? Is withholding sex, for instance, is that considered force? Or is, saying we're going to cancel a
Deprivation
vacation?
of an expected reward is a punishment. So you could, well, no, but I mean, this is a serious question. I mean,
Yeah.
look, if we're thinking about the optimization of social structures, we might as well start from the base level of social structure and scaffold up.
So
Right.
it's like if a wife is upset at a husband, for instance, would that be considered use of force? I think a negative punishment. You're removing a stimulus to punish a person for something. Yeah, would you consider that like a use of force? Or
I would say it would depend to some degree on the intent.
the intent is to punish a
Well, if
Like, oh, bro, I feel like I can't do anything. What?
It's like if a wife is upset at a husband, for instance, would that be considered use of force? So the negative punishment, you're removing a stimulus to punish a person for something. Yeah, would you consider that like a use of force? Or
I would say it would depend to some degree on the intent.
The intent is to reduce the behavior. That's why it's called a punishment, right? Positive or negative refers to adding or removing a stimulus. Punishment or reward refers to whether you're trying to discourage or encourage behavior. So a negative punishment is removing a stimulus in order to, negative punishment is removing stimulus to punish a behavior, right? To decrease the behavior. Why are we even asking this question? I feel like it's a endless string of reductive questions until I don't even know what the fuck we're talking about.
punish a
Well, if the intent is to punish, then it's starting to move into the domain of force. I mean, look.
Are all punishments force? Is that true? If I take away all of my son's candy bars, he doesn't score an A+ in school. Is that force?
Well, we've been talking. There's been bursts of emotion, right?
Yeah.
And that's because we're freeing entropy and trying to close and to enclose it again. And so that's going to produces negative emotion, fundamentally. Most fundamentally, anxiety and pain, and secondarily something like anger, because those emotions are quite tightly linked. And so, within the confines of a marriage, which we might as well make it concrete, there are going to be times where disagreements result in bursts of emotion. And those bursts of emotion don't necessarily have to have an instrumental quality, right? It's when the emotion is used manipulatively.
Outcome is force. You're doing something to change some behavior of others. Almost every single interaction you have with a person is with the goal of changing their behavior. That's why you communicate or do anything. When babies cry, it's to get somebody to feed them. If you talk to somebody, it's to get somebody to play a game with you or to go somewhere with you or to or have a conversation. Almost every single thing definitionally that you utter is to evoke some reaction or response from the person you're uttering it to.
To gain an advantage that's short-term for the person, and then maybe that's at the expense of the other person, or even at the expense of the person who benefits future self, then it starts to tilt into the manipulative. There's a tetrad of traits. So narcissism, Machiavellianism, that's manipulativeness. Narcissism is the desire for unearned social status. That's what you
The dark triad was not good enough anymore. Now we've got a dark tetrad. Is that what he's on right now?
For example, if you were gossiping and elevating your social status. Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy, that's predatory parasitism, and those culminating sadism, and that cloud of negative emotion that's released in the aftermath of disagreement can be tilted in the direction of those traits, and that's when it becomes malevolent. And that's
When he's talking about force, he's talking about it from a psychological level. I don't see what you consider. If you broaden everything to be the widest term possible, then sometimes you're saying anything of substance. That's the issue. Like, yesterday, John forced me to do something. Wow, really? What did he force you to do? Well, he told me that he was going to be really disappointed. This is like a Mr. Girl. He told me he's going to be really disappointed if I didn't clean my room. Well, how did he force you? What do you mean, how did he force me? John's acknowledgement and approval of me is incredibly important to my well-being. The fact that he told me that he was going to hold that hostage, that he was going to become disapproving of me, He's forcing me to do that. He's basically abuse. By him saying that he's no longer going to approve of me, he's going to disapprove me if I don't clean my room. He's forcing me to do it. Like, bro, at this point, we've reduced the word to such a broad thing that encompasses so many different types of behavior. It's like, there's not even any point in talking about the word anymore.
The problem of force starts to become paramount because I think that you're.
You learned the word reductive 2 weeks ago. I don't know what it means.
Dominating things aren't always.
I think that your fundamental presupposition was both Hobbesian and ill-formed. I do not believe that the basis for the civilized polity is force. Now you're saying that.
The lesson here is that Destiny should not have oversimplified how force is used in experimental technology. Wow, retard alert! JP is right to make Destiny engage in nuance to prove his position. There is no nuance here, you retarded fuck. You understand that, like, if we're using this definition of force, you are literally forced to do everything always at all points in time if you live in a state, right? You're forced to do everything. You're forced to wear clothes by threat of by murder, by the way. If you don't wear clothes, you will be murdered, right? Because if we follow that deductive chain of logic, well, what happens? You go outside with no clothes on, somebody's gonna call the police on you. Police show up and they're gonna say, hey, you're breaking the law, you need to go inside or do something. You say no, they're gonna arrest you. You try to resist arrest because you think you have autonomy, they're eventually gonna shoot and kill you, right? Like, I mean, like every single thing is at the end of the day met with force in any state that you live in that has a violent means of enforcing, ultimately, at the end of the day, whatever a police officer or the law tells you to do. That's so reductively stupid and boring, though. What a boring fucking statement. You're not saying anything of value at that point. Like, hey, I just had a really cool revelation today. Yeah, what's your revelation? You know, if you really think about it, the government would kill me if I spoke too loud. Even the government would kill me if I spoke too loud. If I was too loud, and my neighbors reported me for loud noise, and then the building tried to evict me, and I said I didn't want to leave, and then police officers showed up, and they said that I don't have the right to be here, and then I resisted and tried to get out, and then they fought me, and I fought back, and I had a gun to defend myself, and they shot and killed me. In a way, like, it's such a boring non-statement. This is the, by the way, this is the actual philosophical masturbation that people talk about, or the academic masturbation people talk about when they say, like, lay Reddit Fedora tipper. It's when you've reduced everything to such an absurd level that you can literally make any statement to mean anything at any point in time, and you're not saying anything insightful anymore. You're just like, well, everything is. This is like when you get high, you know, like everything at the end of the day, bro, is about sex. It's about who fucks who. What do you mean by that? Well, think about it. If all men or all women said they wouldn't fuck you if you didn't do a thing, and then your bloodline died, and then your genes disappeared, like at the end of the day, isn't everything in the whole world really about fucking people? And then in a way, like, it's just like, okay, it's not. How am I supposed to engage with here?
I think that your fundamental presupposition was both Hobbesian and ill-formed. I do not believe that the basis for the civilized polity is force. Now, you're saying that, you know, you can't abjure the use of force entirely, and I would say, unfortunately, that's true.
I would agree with you.
But if the policy isn't invitational, if I can't make a case that's powerful enough for you to go there voluntarily, then the policy is flawed. Now, it may be that we have some cases where we can't do better than a flawed policy because we're not smart enough, and maybe the...
LOL, Destiny tried to make light of the mechanism that the government used to turn society upside down, and JP wouldn't let him just pass it off as simple as everything has force. Nobody forced you to get vaccinated. You would just have to get tested every week. Like, if you're gonna say that that's force, and I agree that it's a type of force, but you have to be aware that when you say force, that's not what most people are thinking of. It's also, it's a non-central... Wait, didn't I write this down in one of my sneaky fallacious tricks? What do we call this one? I need a name for this. Is it non-central fallacy, or...
Such a busy world.
No. Debate pervertry. Oh, I need to write this one down. When you make an accusation about something, I think Scott Adams wrote on this, didn't he? He called it the non-central fallacy. He just made that name up. But it's like when you say something and it's like, oh, yesterday I was forced to do this thing. And when you say force, it invokes, or yesterday I actually hung out with 3 criminals, right? You know, oh, shit, criminals. Yeah. When you say criminal, that brings a certain thing to mind. And then you're like, yeah, all 3 of them had unpaid parking tickets. You're like, oh,
A promising garden.
that's not really. And I was like, what? You're gonna tell me that's not a crime now? It literally is. Hello, criminal code, state statute. This is actually criminal behavior. They actually have warrants out for their arrest. They've got bench warrants because they were summoned to court. So they are criminal. It's like, okay, yeah, but that's not really what we're talking about, right? Much the same way when you talk about government forcing you to do a particular thing, it's important to be precise. What do we mean when we say force, right? Because if Jordan Peterson has brought into this to encompass every single potential thing that a government could or couldn't do, every positive and negative freedom is now being, every positive freedom and every negative freedom is now being implied here. It's like, okay. In that case, fine. Then every single thing that's happening in society is done at force. But if everything is a thing, then nothing is a thing. It's not doing anything anymore. The whole point of words and ideas is to draw circles and boundaries around things so that we can discuss them and compare them and contrast them.
Cases where we can't do better than flawed policy because
Yes, but everyone would say do this or get fired is force. You can say the thing you're forcing is justified, but it's no less forceful. If the boss forced an employee to have sex or get fired, bad. But if they say do your job or get fired, good. I don't know. Weren't there some people say that they were going to get fired for not getting vaccinated? I don't think that was ever the case. I think you were going to get regularly tested if you weren't going to get vaccinated.
we're not smart enough, and maybe involuntarily, then the policy is flawed. Now, it may be that we have some cases where we can't do better than a flawed policy because
people literally did get fired. If they did, that was up to their private place of employment to determine, which as a conservative, you should fully be supporting. If someone wants to fire you for not getting vaccinated, that's on the place of employment. I'm pretty sure you have the right to do that, don't you?
we're not smart enough, and maybe the incarceration of
Destiny, the issue is that we are making medication part of the thing we enforce. That's already happened. There's already mandatory vaccines in society if you want to be part of the military, if you want to go to public schools. It is already a thing. What do you mean?
Just wait.
criminal policy because we're not smart enough, and maybe the incarceration of criminals with a long-term history of violent offenses is a good example of that. We don't know how to invite those people to court. They have a history, generally from the time they're very young children, from the age of 2, of not being able to play well with others. And it's a very, very intractable problem. There's no evidence in the social science literature at all that hyper-aggressive boys by the age of 4 can ever be socialized in the course of their life. The penological evidence suggests that if you have multiple offenders, your best bet is to keep them in prison till they're 30. And the reason for that is it might be delayed maturation, you know, biologically speaking, but most criminals start to burn out at around 27. So it spikes, big spike in puberty hits, and then stability among the hyper-aggressive types. So actually what happens is the aggressives at 4 tend to be aggressive their whole life, and then they spike at 27. The normal boys they spike at puberty and go back on the basis. Right, so you don't really rehabilitate people in prison.
People have grown men have crimes for years, and when they're outside of those years, they tend not to commit anywhere near as much crime. I'm pretty sure that's true. I don't know. There's some age block where it's just the age blocks where men are so much more likely to commit jail, lock them up if they're out of those crimes for years. Generally, it falls off dramatically.
For obvious reasons. I mean, look at the bloody places. They're great schools for crime in large, but if you keep them there until they're old enough, they tend to mature.
Wouldn't you make a distinction between going to school and going into the military in terms of what the average individual absolutely needs? I would say there's a meaningful difference. I'm saying that the requirements are the same. I'm saying that there are places where bro, I can't believe we have to do vaccines. Please. Force and the monopoly on violence is a literal prerequisite for the state and government, but JDP is bringing it up as if it's up for debate among anyone who is in America. Yeah, that's why I said before, any state you live in, there has to be some violent mechanism of enforcement. Otherwise, people will just do whatever the fuck. What is this? Oh, I read that one. Take history on YouTube, have very detailed videos about why Hitler was left-leaning. I'm sure.
Out of that, except the worst of them tend to mature out of that predatory, short-term oriented lifestyle.
Yep. COVID isn't the most effective. I think that COVID, because of the lack of severity and symptoms, and a lot of disability, and the length of duration of the disease, I'm pretty sure COVID is the most transmitted disease in history. I think measles tends to shut you down a bit more, and you're like sick and out of function. I'm gonna check. What was the last one? Omicron or some shit?
Come close.
The measles are not as often cited in 12 to 18. The Omicron variant has an average basic reproduction number of 9.5 to 5.5. Pretty sure by now though. Also, is measles